Welcome back to the Humble and Brag podcast. In this episode, we're going to be discussing channel versus channel,
Instagram versus YouTube.
the battle of our ages. Interesting, you picked this topic though. I was curious. So, I think it's something we've discussed definitely before in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to maybe kick it off and just explain why we're covering this today? And
Sure. So I think, like most companies, most established companies are going to be running across all the large social channels. So probably they've got some kind of presence on YouTube, on Instagram, probably on TikTok, on LinkedIn, obviously depending on the nature of the company. But say you're just starting out a company, which channel would you focus your resources on and which one would you use to grow?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the arguments for Instagram? What are the arguments for YouTube?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm interested in, and then maybe at the end we can talk a little bit how they can feed off one another as well.
Yeah.
So imagine you're just starting a company. Imagine it's kind of agnostic for us. Obviously, we're focused on YouTube. So we're going to start building on YouTube. But say your e-commerce company or edtech company or health tech, whatever it would be, and you're fairly platform agnostic.
Okay.
Would you go for YouTube or Instagram? And why would you go for YouTube or Instagram?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's very pertinent to what we're currently doing. We've obviously picked our trenches, so to speak. I think it's interesting you mentioned them in the singular as well, because I think the common logic, even a few years ago, was you should be on every channel, posting every day, and burning yourself out and covering everything very thinly. But I think if you are, like, for example, with Humble and Brag, a company of essentially two people, who do everything in-house for themselves as well. It's quite pressing, right? Which platform should you choose? What are the benefits and the pros and cons? Specifically looking at Instagram and YouTube, I think a slightly different view to this on you. I've maybe been around the Instagram ecosystem at previous employers and producing content for it, and it does feel a little bit like, I personally think, a bit of an abyss throwing content into that, and it gets kind of buried in the algorithm, whereas obviously YouTube, you've got the evergreen searchability nature of that, and that's something we can talk about later in the episode. For me personally, I think YouTube would be my go-to on any business, and I think there's a perception that YouTube has a high barrier to entry or a high cost of entry with cameras and lights and editing and thumbnail design and everything. And I don't think that has to be the case. I think YouTube for me is the most versatile platform a business could be on. You have a range of different formats that have then a range of different a range of barriers to entry, perhaps, if you want to look at it that way. You have short form video, which is obviously was kicked off by TikTok a number of years ago, but has been adopted by Instagram, and now YouTube has their YouTube Shorts at play. Super easy to produce. You can do it on your phone. You can screenshot images or notes and talk over it with a green screen effect, things like that. You can host live events on YouTube, which you can on Instagram, but I think this format is much more akin to kind of a TED Talk or a lecture on YouTube, and it carries a bit more clout. Plus, it's then searchable and housed more or less indefinitely on the platform. And it's searchable on your channel. And then you obviously have the bread and butter of YouTube, which is the long form content, which I think is unparalleled on any platform. Firstly, for the sort of the discoverability and searchability of YouTube, catering to search intent in the search bar, but also building an audience and a fan base that come back and re-engage with your content week in, week out if you're publishing consistently. So for me, there's definitely no other channel I'd recommend the company build out. I think it really comes down to the resources though. How big is the team? What is the budget that you have for content? I think definitely there's quite a low barrier to entry. Most people have a smartphone, some kind of iPhone or Android phone in their pocket that they could film content on. I don't think it needs to be polished to be successful on YouTube, and I definitely don't think it needs to be polished to be successful on Instagram. So I think fundamentally this question comes down to resourcing. But I would always say that this perception of YouTube being difficult to get into is definitely changing and should be changing.
So, you mentioned one potential advantage of Instagram is the lower barrier to entry when it comes to the production. Do you think just armed with a smartphone that it's possible to produce decent content for YouTube as well?
Yes, yeah, I do. Whether it's shorts or the long form content I mentioned, like some of the most engaging content I've seen is just someone screen recording a spreadsheet or a Google slide or something and talking through that. And I guess in recent months, a lot of the big creators or the big channels have been talking about this pivot on YouTube to more of an authentic trend, I guess, where that's taken off. And I think people are tired of these like hyper edits and this sort of retention editing that you see on maybe more of the established big creators that kind of lead the way on YouTube. So I definitely think you can do good content on YouTube with a smartphone. You can do good content on YouTube with a QuickTime recording or a Loom recording or something. I think it's really focused on the value, and if the value of what you deliver in the content matches up with the title and the thumbnail, which is half the battle on YouTube, then I think you're setting yourself up for success.
What do you mean? Just because I guess that's a bit of a little bit of an industry specific term with retention editing. What do you mean by retention editing?
A good example of this is if you check out probably one of the largest creators on YouTube, I believe, individual creators, Mr. Beast. I can't quite believe we're diving into this because it's something that I kind of feel a bit icky about. And that's no disrespect to the creators; they've done very well, obviously. But for me, it's a case of if you think of people's attention spans, particularly nowadays with social media, the assumption is that people just drop off constantly or go on to the next thing. So retention editing refers to basically just stuff happening on screen all the time to pique your interest. And that can take the form of visuals or graphics or cuts to different scenes or different, dynamic things happening. And it can be a bit exhausting. I kind of had a conversation with someone recently where we likened this to, it's essentially, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, but it's hard not to sound derogatory, but like it's essentially trash TV. If you think of some of the trash TV that was around in the 90s and early 2000s, it's a little bit like that. It's just very quickly, not even quickly produced. I'm sure a lot of time and budget goes into it, but it's designed in an environment where they're expecting you to lose interest.
I mean, the most recent Mr. Beast videos I've seen did remind me of the kind of Touch the Truck era of Channel 5 in the UK, right? Where you pick some kind of simple challenge, you throw a lot of people at this challenge and then you film them and kind of cut it in, like you said, this very energetic way. Yeah.
And then I think if you pivot that with creators like that guy that we've talked about, Ollier, who's I guess maybe a sort of tech finance vlogger, perhaps. His videos are more akin to that. He just sits, there's very minimal cuts, there's no camera jumps, there's very few motion graphics, if any, and he just sits, but his setup is very well produced, it's crisp, it's sharp, it looks like he's invested in it. But the message is just very clean cut. And there's virtually nothing happening apart from him just talking to camera. But it looks good, it sounds good, and he provides value.
I mean, if that is the style that's going to kind of gain some momentum, then you can really imagine that lowering the barrier to entry to YouTube even more, right? Because it kind of requires, this knowledgeable person in front of the camera delivering something, but you don't necessarily need then these kind of high production values behind the edits.
And just to touch on something you mentioned initially about the kind of the versus element of that, I think if you are starting a business out from scratch, say, or you're building a marketing team from scratch and you want to invest in organic content, to me, the most common sense approach would be the platform that gets you the highest levels of discoverability. And if you think about YouTube as a search engine, it's almost unparalleled in that nature. Whereas if we discussed this earlier, if you go on Instagram and you try and search for something, you might find creators that are making content around that topic. If, for example, you visit Berlin and you want to find out the Berlin, what top 10 restaurants you should try in Berlin if you're a bit of a foodie. You could try typing that into Instagram, but it's more likely that you'll get people that are making content in that niche as opposed to specific videos that give you like a listicle. Whereas I think then YouTube lends itself really well for that. And that can be applied to pretty much any business or industry or niche or topic or whatever. So, I don't know if I've put my flag in the sand enough.
I think that's quite.
But what about you? I'm keen to hear your take because you're sort of you're quite an advocate for Instagram in particular, right? And you've talked about stories and that kind of engagement aspect as well.
I mean, I think the two work well together, but I would concur with you. Like if I was starting something new, I would start with YouTube.
Okay.
3 main reasons, just to kind of categorize them. One for me is like the user level. If you imagine someone on Instagram or on TikTok, arguably on Facebook, maybe a little bit less, the mindset is one of kind of constant discoverability, constant searching. And so people tend to behave very frantically on those platforms, right? You probably know from your own behavior that you kind of scroll, something bores you in 2 seconds, so you switch to another piece of content. So you're really not in that frame of mind of paying attention. And that kind of echoes in every interaction. Say you click on an ad or click on a bit of content, you go through to the website, you see almost always super short session times, lower engagement rates or conversion rates, all those things that kind of echo throughout the funnel. Whereas YouTube is kind of the opposite, that people are watching videos for, average 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe even more. And you see that when they then click through to the website or whatever they engage with next, then super good conversion rates, like long session times. And it can be the same person, it's just with a different frame of mind. And I know we talked about that before, like people saying our attention span is dying. Then you get people binging Netflix for 12 hours straight. It really depends on the platform that you're in, the ecosystem that you're in. So YouTube's really good at that for the user level. And then for me, like the other thing is the content level itself. So like you said, the life after release, like you release something on Instagram and it just disappears or dies after those 24 hours. And so you kind of obliged to continue creating and continue posting. And that generally is difficult to kind of really maintain a good quality of content when you're doing that, unless you really have a lot of resource behind it. So it's a bit of an illusion that just because it's simple, short content, that it's necessarily less resource. Because that video that you produce for YouTube, okay, maybe it takes a couple of days rather than one day or half a day or something like that, but it has no lifespan. And that's the wonderful thing about YouTube, right? You can continue building up the content, and videos that you've created years ago are going to continue generating views and generating traffic to the site, generating awareness, etc. So that kind of content level is super important. And then just at the company level, then you have so much, like, because it's a very like multi-channel platform, you have the shorts and the long form, the lives, etc. You have a lot of ways of reaching the user, engaging them, and then bringing that content back and like embedding it across the site into blog posts, etc., which can improve SEO performance. So it has a really positive benefit in that respect. And I think the companies that we worked at previously is also a real important lever for like driving increased brand awareness as well. And like just a positive sentiment, like a much more personal connection because you see the people behind the company, that kind of thing. And that's kind of difficult to do. Like, you really notice this discrepancy on Instagram between the creator accounts, like individuals. Are interested in people rather than companies.
But off the back of that, you've seen this rise in like influencer marketing as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Companies don't necessarily have the personalities or the in-house talent to then to leverage that kind of interaction, whereas then they can pay for influencers to come in and be like they're kind of almost like brand ambassadors or sponsors or something. And it's interesting, you mentioned attention spans. Like, for one, I do think that people have attention spans, definitely on content. I just think a lot of the content in short form video, you don't really get much value from it. And that's a generalization obviously, but I think if you look at the level of value you could get from a really well-planned, well-structured 10, 15-minute YouTube video, it could be life-changing in terms of career trajectory or upskilling or job searching or whatever. Whereas how much can you really cram into a 1-minute video? And they're never usually quite 1 minute, it's usually 30, 40 seconds. So that's also something to consider.
I mean, that's why people go to YouTube to learn stuff, right? It's such a learning platform.
It's a learning platform. And also when you mentioned multi-format, I think the CEO of YouTube, is it Neil Moran, I think his name is? I should really know this. He just announced this, like, they published this like plan for 2024, and they've deduced to the YouTube TV that the TV apps you might have on like a Chromecast or Apple TV, or maybe it's built into your smart TV. Like viewership on that is like something crazy, like 1 billion a month or something now. So people are definitely sitting down and, as you would with Netflix or a game console, they're turning on YouTube and watching their favorite creators from their sofa, which then completely skews this idea of it as like a mobile first or a desktop first platform. And if you make content that's either entertaining or calming, or maybe there's a certain angle there that you might want to cater your content to for the sofa viewer, but it's definitely on the rise. And I think, making up a large percentage of views for a lot of creators now.
So I think we're a little bit biased towards YouTube. One thing I would mention about Instagram, for me, is the way that you can address people in a kind of timely fashion there in that moment. So basically, say you've got something to promote. For us, it worked very well in the past with live events, for example, to drive registrations there, or to anything that's happening, live, basically. The stories function is just something that YouTube hasn't been able to
they tried
compete with.
But it didn't go very well. I think
I'm still surprised it didn't.
I remember,
if you use the YouTube app,
exactly.
Anyway, but that I remember being, and then even like building up that personal connection. Like I remember AJ and Smart. That's something that was done really, really well. Is it's just really regular stories showing behind the scenes what it's like to work at the company. I thought that was extremely successful. And then also with the Instagram lives as well, the fact that, again, okay, maybe you're in a bit of that frantic scrolling mindset, but as soon as someone goes live, obviously it's highlighted with the stories, and then you can tune into that. That kind of functionality is something that YouTube doesn't have, and so kind of driving people in an instant from the platform to where you want them to go it's kind of difficult to do. So it's much more of a, maybe that's just the balance that they couldn't strike when they tried to create stories.
Maybe they'll relaunch it. But I
After
definitely
watching this podcast, they'll be like,
put the fear of death in them. It's but just to round off there, I definitely think it comes down to, I think it does come down to the team you have or don't have, and your budget as well. And I think there's, we've not really touched on LinkedIn. I know that's maybe adding a third platform into the mix, but I feel like LinkedIn is a very good platform for organic reach right now. So if you view YouTube, I think is a really effective pillar platform where you can pull content from that and distribute it on other channels like LinkedIn, like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, making a resurgence now. I think it can be really effective if you view that as like, okay, that's maybe the sunk cost, so to speak, with like all the investment in the main long form video piece. But from that, the team can cut up micro pieces. We cut up this podcast and publish that, and we'll publish that on LinkedIn. So it's really good to view it as a pillar piece, and then it kind of maybe as opposed to like individual social platforms, maybe this is like more of a kind of a content bank that you're building that you can then affect positive impact elsewhere on other channels as well.
Yeah.
But interesting question. And I thought you'd be much more pro Instagram, but glad to.
I think, ultimately you need both. I'd start with YouTube and, like I said, start probably repurposing YouTube content for Instagram, and then over time, assuming everything's working well, then have someone that's more responsible for Instagram, build it out, an audience that then you can address the stories and things. But to begin with, I think YouTube's the better investment because of the long-term benefits of growing the channel.
I concur.
Okay, good. So answer to the question, YouTube versus Instagram, maybe a little bit unsurprisingly, is YouTube, but quite emphatically. Maybe surprisingly emphatically YouTube.
Unless they're watching this on Instagram somehow, and we've reached the stage where the Instagram is, massively overtaking YouTube.
Instagram's okay.
It's fine. All right. Yeah, it's still punching. I mean, TikTok as well. We could do a whole episode on that.
Yeah, we'll do a couple of weeks' time. We can do TikTok versus YouTube.
Cool, but thank you very much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Humble and Brag podcast, or listening. We also publish this as an audio podcast. Subscribe, follow the podcast, either on YouTube or whichever podcast platform you're listening to. Check us out on LinkedIn. Check out our website, humbleandbrag.com, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.